Hello, this is Just Listen, hosted by George Goodman. Today is July 13th, 2026. Welcome to the podcast and welcome to the week. I hope that you have a great week. And as usual, I want to say that I want you to subscribe to my channel. I deal in facts and details. So let's get to it here. Today, I want to talk about the U.S. federal government policy on assault weapons and high capacity magazines. So, in the last couple of weeks, something happened that I'm going to get into, and you'll see why it's relevant to you. The first reason that it's relevant is probably by January next year, you're going to hear them talking about assault weapons and high capacity magazines endlessly. Now, did you know that the Supreme Court has not weighed in on assault weapons and high capacity magazines? And it hasn't reached their docket yet. So it's going to be coming up. Now, did you know in 1994, Congress actually passed legislation because there was a lot of things in that legislation prohibiting the sale of certain semi-automatic firearms and large capacity magazines. So what Congress did at that time is they made it expire in 2004, and so to date, Congress has not renewed it or passed any new legislation. Why am I framing it like this? The key to most things going on in the United States comes back to the folks in Congress who can act on things if they really want to make the changes. Individual people like a president, for example, they're just one branch of government. But the Constitution gives Congress the power to make these changes. All right. So, as I said, the federal ban on certain assault weapons and high capacity magazines expired federally. So, about a dozen states and municipalities, including Illinois, also Connecticut, California, and New York, have enacted their own local and statewide bans on specific semi-automatic rifles like the AR-15 and high-capacity magazines. All right, so you have to know how you feel about that and also keep yourself informed because, like I said in the beginning, they're going to be talking about this endlessly starting next year. In the fall, the Supreme Court may look at it. Now, why are states still allowed to ban assault weapons? Okay, so they used the example of the AR 15, but some states like Illinois have said all assault weapons. Okay, so here's why the appeals court. Now, if it reaches the appeals court, that means that the next level higher judicial court has said that they can't do it. So the appeals court weighs in, and they are right before you get to the Supreme Court. All right, so I was paying attention that day when they were talking about the court systems, right? Okay, so here's why. Judges have found these regulations consistent with historical traditions of regulating dangerous and unusual firearms, distinguishing between weapons designed for military or law enforcement use and those intended for self-defense. So that's why in these 10 states, they are currently upholding that they can ban these semi-automatic weapons or the assault weapons. Okay? So that's where it's at now. Now, what is historical tradition? Historical tradition, courts have interpreted the Second Amendment precedents like the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association Incorporated versus Braun to allow regulations that align with long-standing historical traditions of firearm limitations. So, in the big picture, someone has questioned this before, apparently in New York, and I haven't read the case, but if it's an unusual weapon, dangerous and unusual, that's how they characterize it, then it can be banned by the state according to the U.S. Court of Appeals. Now, the second point is military versus personal arms. Judges have determined that semi-automatic rifles like the AR-15s are functionally closer to military-style weapons than to firearms typically used for personal self-defense, thus placing them outside the strict protections of the Second Amendment. Okay? So that was the second one. Now, public safety. Courts have recognized the state's interest in mitigating mass casualty events, as these bans typically restrict weapons and high-capacity magazines capable of inflicting rapid mass casualties. While these appellate courts have ruled in favor of the bans, the U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to hear the challenges to similar bans in the Chicago area and Connecticut to provide definitive nationwide guidance on their constitutionality. So that is the bottom line. So we got military versus personal arms, public safety, and then historical tradition. So that's what will be argued or debated by the Supreme Court, maybe in the fall, maybe. All right. So as I told you, it was upheld. So in July, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit upheld Illinois' statewide assault weapons ban, reversing a lower court's ruling. Similar bans have been upheld by federal appeals courts in other jurisdictions like the Second Circuit. Okay, so we're building the case now for when it comes to the Supreme Court. And as I told you before, Congress did act in 1994, and the Supreme Court did not hear this law and rule on it, make a ruling, because it expired. So you have to give the previous administration and that Congress credit for doing it for 10 years, because that's probably why the Supreme Court didn't. Now, if you will remember, because I didn't at first until I looked it up, so after there was a mass shooting in the late 2000s, probably 2010 or 11 or 12, President Obama tried to put it back into place too, after a mass shooting at one of the grade schools, and that failed. Now, why Congress won't act, don't know. That's out of this scope of this podcast. Okay, now, state level regulation and legal battles. Now, as you are aware of, in general, the states get to decide how the state is run. There are two things that get people up in arms. One is abortion. The other one is the right to bear arms. So, state level, over a dozen states and Washington, D.C. have enacted their own bans on assault weapons and large capacity magazines. So, judicial review. State level bans face heavy litigation under Second Amendment challenges. So, and the restrictions are still in place to date. Now, what do you think about assault weapons and high capacity magazines? It is important what you think. And I want everyone listening to the podcast to go and look at the Second Amendment. And that will tell you what is going to happen once this reaches the Supreme Court. The reasoning that they're using, historical tradition, military versus personal arms, and public safety, there were some good attorneys on this, but we the people have to decide if we think assault weapons and high capacity magazines should be banned. Now, one thing to think about quickly is, well, how do you ban them? So does that mean that they can't be sold anywhere in the U.S.? Remember, when I talked about firearms, people know how to make them as well, right? So currently, you can order the parts from anywhere in the world and get them and put it together. Because, quick reminder that the guns that people register, which is 98% of them, people don't use those to commit any crimes. The 2% are the unregistered guns that people put together and use for crime and for murdering each other. So with the assault weapons, if you're going to pass the law, you have to cover all of the bases, which means basically put it in writing how you're going to enforce it, that people cannot get it. Currently, people are getting it for recreation and they're at the firing ranges. So let me know what you think, and if you think that with the midterms coming up in the fall, and then again next year, if assault weapons will be on the news with the mainstream media night and day. So have a great day and look out for each other. Please subscribe.